Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild supplement Enhanced Focuses, designed by Tyson VanOverhill, aka Double Crescent Productions, for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe, and gold patrons RPG, Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, and Pretty Boy and Yuma. Thank you all very much for your support. So spellcasters get a bit of the shaft when it comes to loot. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is way less loot-based than previous editions. Most abilities that loot would normally grant you or power is now just baked right into the characters, which is good in a lot of ways. But for those of us who like loot, we still like loot. And it's always been the case where the martial fighters or maybe the hybrids are going to definitely be more excited and use loot more effectively than a spellcaster. So what Enhanced Focuses does is it adds specifically spell casting loot, spellcasting magical items, and a focus in D&D 5th edition is something that can be forgotten about pretty quickly because it's almost a throwaway thing in the rules as written, which is technically you need materials to cast these spells, or you can just channel everything through a focus. And it's kind of a role-playing tool where it's like, okay, well, I focus my spells through, a wand that I hold up or a staff, or in a lot of cases people just cast spells. And in our campaign, we've never really paid much attention to focuses beyond maybe the occasional RP note, but think of these as less of a focus and more of literally just magical items designed specifically for spellcasters. And you get over 60 focuses here, 60 magical items. I think my count was 65. And they're divided into 4 categories. You get arcane focuses, druidic focuses, holy symbols, and bardic instruments to specifically lock into all the primary spellcasters, because I believe bards are basically considered primary spellcasters in 5th edition. I think they get pretty much full spell slots, the same as like a wizard or a druid, so I'm glad they got some love here. And you get a nice variety and mix of items here. Each one is divided up into multiple types, which are listed at the beginning. So, for example, arcane can come in the classic crystal ball, orbs, or a staff, or a wand, or a tome. And they're all obviously very flavored to that class type. The holy symbols can be those cool, like chain, incense, smoky censers, or reliquary, a holy container, or liturgical texts, so just a holy book or a rod. So they're all very thematic, and they all have various special abilities that specifically tie into either spells or spell types or abilities, including ability resources that those classes would use. So these make really, really fun, cool rewards, particularly for like specific character types, as well as maybe like completing like a personal quest, or they feel much more personal than, say, a +1 longsword that you would find as a random loot somewhere. These feel like very personal items to specific character types, and there's a really nice section later on from a role-playing standpoint in like how to award these items, which is very much appreciated. And the different themes could include, let's see, for druids, there's a lot of wild shape, like the shadow totem. When you use wild shape, the darkness spell is cast, and you can see through magical darkness, and you get advantage on stealth checks. Obviously, that's a very, very powerful item. Or if you have someone that's into maybe poisoning people, the Venom Fang. Whenever you cast a spell that requires a saving throw to end its effect, you can choose to give the targets the poisoned condition. So a lot of them will either use like the resources, for example, the wild shape, or specific spell types that class can use. Like a lot of the holy symbols have to do with channel divinity, and these are all both for cleric and paladins. All of these do require attunement, and they're all not all, most of them are tier 2 and 3. That's a little bit of a disappointment on my end, is I was hoping for a nice range between at least tier 1, 2, and 3, because I think it should be pretty common knowledge now that most D&D is played within the tier 1 and tier 2 levels, which those are every, I think it's every 5 levels of play, and there's not a whole lot of tier 1, so most of these are a little more stronger than low-level play, and I would have liked to see, and Xanathars did a good job of this, is adding ones that were basically mostly aesthetic, like, you know, maybe you have an instrument that just glows bright or gives off like pink smoke or something, you know, something that's not necessarily super magical and not very powerful, but something you feel like you can give like a level 2 player without upsetting the balance too much. And I feel like you can hand those out a lot more than what you would normally do for any magical item, because they really don't have a specific effect other than a role-playing effect that, you know, a clever player could use that to their advantage. Certainly there's not a whole lot of that here. I think each of the class types has maybe 1 or 2 uncommon of the rarity, which I think denotes the tier 1, except for bards. Like half the bards instruments are uncommon, so I don't know if bards were just given weaker things for some reason, but it's not quite even. The bard has like a lot of the uncommon, the tier 1 and the tier 2, whereas everybody else is mostly tier 2 and tier 3. But I did like all these instruments, and I do feel like a lot of these items would be part of a character's important, you know, personal arc or quest chain, to where you would want them to be very powerful, rewarding items. So on the one hand, yeah, we're not getting a lot of tier 1 items. On the other hand, though, I do think these are maybe not actually the kind of items you want to even give tier 1. I think you want them to be more powerful and more rewarding, which could be really, really effective as a fun personal quest arc. The bardic instruments, of course, use a lot of the what's it called? Bardic inspiration. Let's see if I can find an example here. So for the rally drum, when you give bardic inspiration to an ally, that ally also gains temporary hit points equal to your bardic inspiration die plus your spellcasting modifier. That's a really cool thing to have. Again, it doesn't add a new ability or a new power, it just enhances your current power, which again is why I think these make good personal quest or, you know, player character specific. You know, if they have a specific theme, also works really well. For example, in my Tomb of Annihilation campaign, my bard is a bard of whispers, so it's all psychic. She can do psychic damage, and there's actually several ones in here that have to do with like frightening or enhancing the psychic damage. So the discordant pipes, when casting a spell that deals psychic damage, the spell is cast as if 1 level higher. That's really great. The piercing pipes, when dealing psychic damage to a target, also deal damage equal to your spellcasting modifier. And none of these are very overly complicated, which I appreciate. They're usually pretty easy to figure out. They give they don't have very complicated, you know, they don't add additional spells. There's not like a spell per day or anything, because they use those resources that you already have. So it's just like when you do this happens. When you're doing something you would normally already do as that class, this just enhances that already, which I think is why they're categorized as, I guess, a focus rather than a straight-up magical item, because they're useless in the hands of somebody who doesn't have those kind of effects or abilities, which, again, it ties into that kind of personal, reflects a character's personal abilities and what they like to do. So the druids, you know, do they like wild shaping? Do they like dealing damage? Do they like healing? All of these things can be represented here with these various items. And one of them is really simple, like an elemental staff for the wizard or sorcerer. It's just that you can reward any one of the following types: cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. And then any evocation spell that's not a cantrip that deals damage of that type can deal 1 additional die of damage. That's just, again, it enhances something you would already do, so it doesn't give you a new ability, it just makes that the things that you are already doing, and it rewards you for further going down that theme. So if you have a cold-themed, you know, wizard or sorcerer who only cast those spells, this rewards you to do even more than that, which I believe we did have. It was a lightning-themed sorcerer in my last campaign. So again, a lot of these items, I'm already looking at them from a DM's point of view in terms of rewarding players. I'm like, okay, like this would work, this would work, this would work, which is very nice to have. And I think between the 60 plus focuses you have, you're probably going to find something good in here. I do like the organization of it all. I like the what do you call it, sepia tone, like parchment. That's what I'm looking for. Parchment style paper. I like the black and white art here. I don't like the font at all. The font is super distractingly plain. I don't know. Is this Times New Roman? I'm not saying everything in the DM's Guild has to be the Scaly Sands or whatever, but this, I don't know. It's distracts me with how like it just literally looks like it was typed up in Microsoft Word and then just kind of given this nice and I do like the background, but it's just, and it feels like a petty weird thing to complain about, but I just do not like this font at all. It also makes it look really like, I don't know, like it's smaller. I think maybe it's because you look at it and you're like, oh man, this is a lot to read, just, and obviously I like to read, but it's just, it doesn't quite fit with what I normally see at the DM's Guild. And again, I'm not saying everybody has to be Scaly Sands, but I don't like that plain font style. I do like the background and the art that goes with it. What I really want to point out here is the second half of the supplement, which is a whole section on creating your own focuses. And this is less about the mechanical aspects of creating a magic item, because again, the Dungeon Master's Guide has a lot of those rules already in place for creating your own magical items. Although the designer does list specifically, just kind of note like a bullet pointed list of like, here's how to create magic items for these different tier levels of play. So for an uncommon item, it shouldn't be that powerful, obviously. So maybe you can give a condition for a single round of, poisoned or restrained, or you could affect a first level spell, knock a creature prone. Those are kind of like first tier 1 style effects of magical items. And tier 2 opens things up quite a bit. You can enhance healing, you can grant advantage, you can give temporary hit points, give exhaustion, give a condition that lasts for a whole combat, and it goes on from there. So those are very nice to have. But what it mostly does is give it from a role-playing standpoint, and this I found incredibly useful and appreciative. And not only that, but the designer uses a personal example of creating and rewarding 4 specific magical focuses that are used in this supplement, and which I would presume would be the entire inspiration for creating this supplement, or maybe it's vice versa, I don't know. But it sounds like this is literally the designer's adventuring party, which is Jeff, Jennifer, Molly, and Tom, who have this party. Let's see, Evocation Wizard, Land Circle Druid, Oath of Vengeance Paladin, and a Valor Bard. And the designer has created the Elemental Staff, the Stinging Vine, the Icon of Dread, and the Ghastly Dralier. I have no idea. Apparently it's a Dutch instrument of some sort of crank string instrument. But it's really nice because it gives you an example of okay, here are these characters' themes. So for example, the Evocation Wizard is all about fire. So obviously the Elemental Staff that is attuned to fire works perfectly well. But more than that, it actually says, okay, how did I balance this? Well, looking through the wizard spells that deal fire damage, adding a single die of damage, averages an additional 4 to 6 damage. So for the biggest boost would be to Scorching Ray, but you don't want to do it to a cantrip because obviously that would increase the entire tier of the cantrip. So you can literally see the designer like working through, like in their head, how to create these items, and I found that really, really useful to just read through their thought process as if literally they're just dictating like how to make these items and how it got from that point to where it got into here, and then obviously a bunch of other items were created to go along with that. But I found this really, really fascinating to read. I'm so glad it was included. I really enjoyed reading it from a mechanical, how they created these things standpoint, but also in the next pages we get to see how these items were rewarded to that character. So for example, that wizard set on his own after his old master was murdered, and following plot hooks that could lead to the murderer and incentivize the character. This new focus could have been built by the old master who was murdered, or passed on by another master, giving a legacy of being wielded by master wizards. So it's like, how do I reward this character with this item? And again, it's all tied to their own personal stories, which is an excellent way to play D&D. I highly recommend it. No matter what your campaign is, you don't have to craft your campaign out of their personal stories. You can treat them like, side quests, like a Dragon Age or a Mass Effect or something like that, to use a kind of a big mainstream example. But your party all has, you've got your overarching campaign, but each of your party members has their own personal quest that they're also tied to, their own side story. And a really fun tool is to be able to either reward them upon completion, or maybe give this as a part of the chain, is this cool magical item that's tied to their character specifically. And that's a lot of what this is. So much so that I would love to see this designer come up with one that was basically this, but not necessarily spellcasters. Like, do it for like every class. Use one for the Battlemaster's dice that can be enhanced, or what are some other martial character abilities? I think we've actually got most of the characters reflected in here. Maybe like a rogue's sneak attack can do something else. So a barbarian rage. Every class has obviously specific things they can do. I would love to see like another one of this supplement that's designed for maybe the non-spellcasting classes, that gives them that same kind of love in terms of how to enhance a character's abilities that they're already using. So a lot of rewarding loot in D&D is about trying to figure out what your players actually want, because the last thing a DM wants to do is reward somebody with something and they all just look at it, kind of shrug collectively, and say like, well, I guess we'll sell it or throw it on the pile. Like, that's super discouraging for a DM, especially if at DM you're just like throwing out there with magical items that aren't as tied to the characters. So creating ones that are tied to characters are very highly recommended, and I really like the way that the thought process is worked through pretty well here. You can see there's actually a entire sidebar of sample hooks for introducing these focuses, and of course they are quite vague, but they're designed to kind of get get a DM's mind going. So, bestowed by an organization, recognition of the character's work, recovered from a group or individual that stole it for their own purposes, or it came out of a dungeon, or recovered from a vault, held by a creature who knows the focus's worth and is holding it for ransom. Again, those are all pretty vague, but they can start those ideas of like, maybe an entire quest line can be tied to this one item, because it can be that powerful and that useful for that character. Because automatically, if a character's already using that thing all the time, obviously a bard is using their bardic inspiration, then that item becomes useful to them right away. And obviously you can easily tie that to whatever theme that your bard is. Are they more of a martial bard who attacks? Are they a illusionist bard? Are they a psychic damage bard? Then you've got focuses for all of those different things, and that is exceedingly rewarding and a lot of fun. And you can see it just keeps going on how the designer thought of these items. Let's see, to use the wizard's example, you can see staffs and wands both evoke the image of a spellcaster's arcane fire. Staff for mingling with about to deal massive damage to foes, really evocative and fits the theme of this focus. So again, it's the designer working through the process, looking through the stuff that they even listed. So amulet, blade, crystal orb, and then deciding on the staff as being the right tool to use. That's really, really fun. I like the bard instrument too. Apparently the bard character is a military bard who's maybe a bit lower level than the rest of the party. And the designer wants to come up with a fear effect. The fear effect would go well with a fluted or percussion instrument, but the illusions go better with mechanical. On top of that, stringed instruments imply precise and thoughtful casting. You can see really the thought process going through here. The hurdy-gurdy, a stringed instrument with a cranking mechanism, can make a deep, ominous tone that carries, as well as be tapped for a percussive sound. But the name is not that magical, ominous, or intimidating. The Dutch version, the Dralier, has a much more ominous name. So even how they came up with that instrument is listed here, which is absolutely fantastic, to where I'd almost want like notes on all of these instruments, because I love that flavor of how it got to be that type. But I really like the example here with those 4 items. I mean, I like the the section in general on just creating your own focuses, but I really think what drives it home is that personal touch of going through and actually making these 4 separate items for these 4 separate characters, and how it tied into their characters' abilities and their backstories. And that, as a DM, makes me excited to be able to use these kind of items in my own campaign with my own characters who have all really strong themes. So really good stuff here. Let's go over my pros and cons for enhanced focuses. Pro, you get 15 to 20 new thematically appropriate magical items per spellcasting class. And by spellcasting class, we mean wizards, sorcerers, clerics, paladins, druids, rangers. I think, is that included? Let's see, druids. Actually, it's just it says by spellcaster. I feel like if you're including paladins with clerics, you should include rangers with druids. That's just me. For a total of 65 new focuses. So you get a ton of items here. The second half of a guide, my other pro, is a guide to creating your own focuses, as well as an excellent tutorial for how 4 of the focuses were created. As I mentioned, I really like that personal touch quite a bit. And then the other pro is a detailed list of hooks and tips for granting PCs their enhanced focuses. That sidebar was very nice to have. Cons, it feels very petty to mention this, but it really is a bit of a mark against it, which is this font is just very, very plain, distractingly so while I'm reading it. It just feels like I'm reading a Microsoft Word product, and I like the title of everything. The organization is great. The way, obviously it's listed like magical items would be, where it's the type and then the rarity and if it requires attunement and all that is great. But just the actual font here is just not good looking. The other con is that the focuses are a bit top heavy when it comes to power and rarity, with most landing in 2 to 3, and I'm torn on having that be a con because, again, I like these being very useful rewards, which would be towards a character's later stages of their career, to where they've obviously used their ability quite a bit, and now you can enhance it with this awesome item that's a reward for their personal quest. But just for the sake of having a good variety of items, I would have liked to see a few that are just not that powerful, that are just maybe almost purely aesthetic, that maybe the classic, like, again, Xanathar's I think added a bunch of these, but maybe the specific item just has a glow to it or releases smoke or something that makes it to where it's a pretty barely an uncommon item kind of a thing. Just a few of those would have been nice to see here. Final verdict. Enhanced Focuses provides dozens of solid spell and ability boosting magical items for spellcasters, as well as a nice create your own section with a rich personal touch. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.